So I'm up here to introduce our next presenter. And before I do that, I just want to acknowledge all the really smart and wise people in this room. Stephen, you're one of those people I've learned a tremendous amount from over the past couple of years. And Stephen Woodley, I've always been intimidated by the amount of knowledge you have in your brain. It was great to hear from you today. And everyone else in this room, even, Shaylin Drukas this morning with, the importance of youth voices and the work of the CCIucn. I say all this on purpose because we haven't typically had voices from the urban parks agenda or the city parks agenda before within the CCIucn from since I've been involved, which isn't a huge amount of time. But I am so delighted that Dave Harvey, who's the executive director of Park People in Toronto, has joined us today. Because like the messages Karen Keenley-Side was letting us know with Nature for All this morning, and the work that we've been trying to do through Parks for All and engaging members within this community at all levels of government and right across our great country, Dave's doing the very same thing from a community parks perspective. And I thought that his message today is incredibly important for us to hear because Dave's doing work that's building the constituency of conservation supporters for us. And I'm so excited to hear you talk, Dave, and I'm really grateful that you came today. Thank you. Come on up. Let's welcome Dave.
And I'm so glad that, thanks, Don. I'm so glad that the presentation actually came on. And I was hoping that Don wouldn't have to keep speaking. This is all in clicker. That's forward, that's back, perfect. Unfortunately, I came here a little late, but how's the day been? Good, yeah, you still got energy going. We're gonna meet the pathway targets, good things are gonna happen. We'll do that then. And so what I'm going to talk about today is Park People is a relatively new organization. So I'll give you a little bit of background on that. I'll talk a little bit about the nature programming work that we do. And then I'll talk a little bit about how some of the urban agenda and the nature agenda can connect. And Stephen was saying earlier that you're going from a big global perspective into regional. I'm seeing all sorts of people I know. And we're also going from, I think Stephen was talking about 260,000 square kilometers. I'm going to be talking about 1 square kilometer and how exciting that is for us in cities. Park People, it was founded in 2011. Essentially, we support and mobilize people to activate the power of parks in their own local community. And it's all really about maximizing the benefits of city parks to people. That's the environmental benefits, economic benefits, social, and health. And how do we do that? Our basic motto is when communities get involved, parks get better. So that's mobilizing volunteers, philanthropy, businesses to partner with city governments to get the most out of city parks. We do that by creating Park Friends groups. In the City of Toronto alone, we've helped create 110 Park Friends groups that are stewarding, making good things happen in their parks. We do that with toolkits, resources. We do that with conferences. We have a great annual Toronto Park Summit every year, one coming up on February 24th. We had Canada's first National City Parks Conference in Calgary last year. We do a lot of different granting programs. This is a brand new program with TD Park People Grants that just started this week. That's going to be 11 grants in 5 different cities across Canada supporting great community events. And we do a lot of partnerships with organizations like the Toronto Arts Council and TIFF to bring programming into different communities in cities. Our work had been just strictly City of Toronto, but now we've been expanding that work beginning last year right across the country in various different ways. We also work on a lot of individual projects. So the Green Line Projects is a park that we're driving in Toronto. That's the creation of a new 5-kilometer long linear park in downtown Toronto along a hydro corridor. We have the Western Family Parks Challenge, which was a great partnership with the Western Foundation and the Ontario Trillium Foundation that helped put almost $6 million into innovative park projects that were connecting people with nature in the City of Toronto. We do a lot of fee-for-service work with the Bentway, which is an incredible new park which just opened last week in Toronto under the Gardiner Expressway. Yes, you can bring nature and greenery and great things right under a highway. We set up the governance model for that. So that's the first park conservancy in Toronto, and only the second park conservancy in Canada. And we do a lot of great research work with things like our Making Connections report on how we can find new parks to serve urban needs. But the core of our work is really around this Sparking Change program, and that's really focused in on the social benefits of parks. So particularly with underserviced neighborhoods. We're very lucky in Canada that in our inner suburbs, in our lower income neighborhoods, there actually is quite a bit of green space. But what we try to do is really make sure it's the green space that really serves those communities and is building up the social capital of those underserviced neighborhoods. So, you know, essentially, Park People is a community building group. We're very city focused. We're not an environment group. So why am I here today and why am I talking to you? One, Don asked me to, and when Don asks you to do something, you do it. But as Don was mentioning earlier, I think like there is this connection. There is this connection between how people connect with nature in cities and the importance of meeting those new protected spaces targets and achieving the nature agenda that we all want to. So I think it's really about building all these partnerships together. I think it's great, like having things like today, having the conference that we had in Banff last year and the Canmore the year before, bringing the whole perspective from downtown urban places to places that Stephen was just talking about and how we all get to the nature agenda that we all want. Why are cities important in part of the whole nature agenda? You've seen these numbers before. This is where people live. This is where more and more Canada is. The densities is getting larger and larger, and with very significant new immigrant populations, but who also want that connection to nature. And people are in cities and people love parks. This is just your typical day in Trinity Bellwoods. We got a lot of parks in many of our cities that are actually being loved to death. People are using them so much. And why do people go to parks? The number one reason that get identified in some of the public life studies that we do is people want to just get a break from things. And sometimes that's actually, they want to get back to nature, but it's also just get away from things a little bit. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a fantastic, incredibly beautiful spot like this or other broad nature. It can just be a bench and a tree, but it's just a way to get out of it and to connect back with nature. And I think it's just ingrained in our DNA to want to get part of that life, particularly when increasingly in our cities, you know, people are living in condos, they're working in office areas, they're going from their apartment to the subway to their office, and they need that connection, they need that greenery along the way. I'm going to talk about a few ways that we connect people with nature in cities, and you know, there's great examples of this with so many organizations, many of which are here today, right across the country. But I'm just going to talk about a few of ours. The Salmon Festival. So people go crazy for salmon. We started doing this program in Scarborough, and it's now expanded into Pickering too. We started with about 100 people. We get more than 1,000 people a year that all fills up. People just have this visceral connection to seeing the salmon swim up the river. And yes, they are farmed, introduced salmon. They're not native, and they can't actually spawn, but people really get into it. And it's giving them hope, and it's just that connection back to nature. Again, with bees, people are crazy about bees. This is this Green Line project I mentioned about this linear park, and we planted a whole range of pollinator gardens along there. But to really get people out and engaged in it, we did this parade that involved music and food, and it really got people really excited about it. But they go crazy for bees. Last species that they go crazy for, butterflies, monarchs. So salmon, bees, monarchs, people go crazy. So this is a community in Scarborough and Driftwood, very heavy Asian population. And we couldn't give away the native plants they were trying to do. It's basically, they got a different concept of what beautiful plants are, and these were just weeds. But when we actually educated them in Mandarin about the importance of pollinators, they got right into it. So it was a very successful program with that. And again, food. We used a lot of food. A big part of all the programming we're doing with nature is food. Up in the Betty Sutherland Trail up in North York. So there we worked with a bunch of ESL students, and so we trained 21 ravine walk leaders who are actually now leading the walks in Mandarin and Arabic that are bringing people down in Toronto's ravine system. Again, as I mentioned earlier, with Canada, we're quite lucky that in a lot of our lower income neighbors, there actually is quite a bit of green space and a lot of nature in those inner suburbs. This is Panorama Park, one of the projects that we supported with the Western Family Parks Challenge, and it helped create a community food garden and native pollinator garden, and with a day camp to support it for programming. But the big problem we had to help them with is with this fence along the back. So there's so many deer in the area that the deer were coming in to eat it all down. But it just shows you how nature is connecting in. And this is in Rexdale, in one of the most dense, lowest income neighborhoods in Toronto. And it's a very Canadian phenomenon, these tower communities. So this is right at Jane and Finch in Toronto. And it's private apartment towers that were built in the 60s and 70s with tons of dead green space basically all around it. So again, with the Western Family Parks Challenge, we're able to provide some funding on privately held land that built community gardens and a community orchard there. And for park people, it's not about city parks, it's about publicly accessible open space. So for so many of our communities, particularly in our higher needs communities, it is this type of large amounts of dead green space that you can activate and really naturalize. And again, partnering with groups like Mabel Arts, their focus is really in social housing communities. Again, they're right across Canada. They have these large towers with basically dead grass in the middle of it, and they can really be made into these dynamic community areas. We partner with groups like Mabel Arts that do great work in Etobicoke in Toronto, and we're partnering with them to bring their arts programming that connects arts into nature, bringing back greening into social housing developments, and we're going to bring that program into 5 cities across Canada. Really amazing project. So just going to talk a few examples here about what I was talking about earlier was all about programming. This is all about some design ideas. So this is a hydro corridor that's in Toronto that goes from, starts on the Don River, goes out through Rouge Park and out to the eastern parts of Durham region. And with the Western Family Parks Challenge, we're able to put $800,000 of funding in here. And so essentially it's this, again, more dead grass essentially. And was able to, with funding to the Conservation Authority, plant 140 acres of butterfly habitat in this hydro corridor with a bike path going through it. And it's basically gone from 0% biodiversity, like literally nothing living in the area. And there's actually bobolinks and other endangered species that are now nesting in those areas. And it's been so successful, TRCA is exploring about doing the whole path, which is right from the Don River right into Rouge Park. It'll be a 14-kilometer long path through butterfly habitat. And if you think about all the hydro corridors we have in so many of our urban areas, there's just incredible potential for bringing nature into those areas. A few ideas I'm going to just talk about here that we haven't been directly involved in these, but trying to spread the word on some of these around Canada. This is actually a land bridge in Saskatoon that was built on the same principles of a nature bridge in Banff. So this is actually, instead of having putting up a bridge to connect wildlife, it's actually putting in a bridge to connect people, but doing it in a natural way that can also support wildlife at the same time. Indigenous. So there's some really exciting things happening on Indigenous placemaking in city parks across Canada. This is an incredible project up in Thunder Bay, but it's obviously can do a lot towards reconciliation, but we've just done some really, really fascinating projects bringing in urban Indigenous leaders, and our planning focus is always on like a year or two, or how are you going to meet the immediate community needs, and to bring in people that are talking about what's the connection to the land 7 or 8 generations back, or what do we want this land to look like 10 generations from now. It really just changes your whole way of thinking about your connection to space. So many of our cities in Canada have these great ravine and valley systems. In Edmonton, they've got this new funicular that's just opened a couple of weeks ago to connect people into their systems. Really neat guerrilla groups. This is Champ de Possible is in Mile End in Montreal, and they basically took 10 acres of industrial land that was abandoned, naturalized it themselves, and now the city's coming in and making it an official city park. And I'm sure you've all heard about Rouge Park, but to me, this is one of the most exciting opportunities in Canada. So it's 20,000 acres, 30 kilometers long from end to toe. So excited about seeing Parks Canada coming into urban areas. 5,000 of those acres are going to be in the city of Toronto. You've got 7 million people within an hour's drive of this. You've got some of the most diverse communities in Canada surrounding this. I really, really do think that within 10 years, people in Toronto are going to be saying Rouge Park is one of the greatest assets and one of the things they love best about living in Toronto. And I do think there's a lot more opportunities that Parks Canada can be looking at, additional national parks. I know there's efforts in Vancouver and Montreal to consider additional national parks in those areas. I think in provincial parks we can be doing a lot more too. I know Murray is Murray here? Oh, there he is, yeah. So there's a lot of great work that's happening right across Canada from people like Murray and many others, and you're going to be hearing right after me too, that are doing great work around bringing nature and biodiversity and supporting it in urban and near urban areas. And it's great to see that, so Murray's doing a lot of work to actually start accumulating that as part of the pathway process. And so until now, we haven't really told that story, I don't think, of what's the cumulative impact of all this great work that's happening in near and urban areas. And for, Canada, our cities are right along the south. There's a lot of species that can only be found in those areas, and it's some of the most endangered areas. And there's so many municipalities that are doing such great work in that area. And let's tell that cumulative impact and the work that's going on with that. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from Europe and what they've been doing to bring in national parks into their urban areas. And in the US, there's just the National Park Service has traditionally had a much stronger presence in cities. They've got a really interesting, aggressive urban agenda to bring that nature to, story and connection into people in cities. So, I just leave you with this, because essentially it's my firm belief that this is the solution to achieve the national protected areas agenda that we all want. And we've got to be able to connect with these people and make that real for people and make it something that they want to participate in too. So that's part of our challenge. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave. I have the pleasure of introducing Ava Katic from the National Capital Commission and Nick Stow, who is with the City of Ottawa. We're continuing with the urban parks theme, and I think it's very important. I come from an animal services background, and for me it seemed that almost all urbanites, their experience with wildlife was the raccoon in their attic, and that was not a very positive experience. And the opportunity to have parks and green belts that will get people, because the vast majority of the people in Canada live in those urban areas, get those people out so that they understand, have an appreciation for nature, and then can support nature. The initiatives on a broader scale, I think, are very important. So, Nick, Ava?
Well, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to hear some good stories and all the hard work you're doing. So Nick and I are tag teaming. Can everyone hear me okay? We're tag teaming on our presentation. I'll take the first little bit. And our focus is how are we connecting people to nature in urban landscapes. And it's really nice to hear all the great things happening that in Dave's shop and the park and people movement. And we'll have to get connected somehow for sure with our work. Just waiting for the presentation to come up, but my name is Eva Katic. I'm with the National Capital Commission. The National Capital Commission is also called the NCC, not to be confused with the other great NCC. I've been with them now for I guess over 15 years. Before that I was working in Banff National Park with Parks Canada, and it's a really wonderful career I've had a chance to live in the town of Banff and work on big issues with our big files in Banff National Park. And now I'm here in Canada's capital, have a really big city and a very small natural land base. And what's very interesting for me is there's a lot of commonality with what we're trying to achieve in both places. So the NCC, everything we do here is to well, it's essentially to be inclusive and meaningful, and at the end of the day, to make the capital the best that it can be. We're thriving to connect, and something that's very special to me is the aspect of nature. So the NCC and the planning for the capital started back, a little bit of history for everyone that's not too familiar, at the end of the Second World War. Prime Minister Mackenzie King thought it'd be a really good idea to commission a report to give him some guidance on what that capital should look like. And he created a model, and that model really drove the development of Canada's capital region. And something that's very, very special is that the result of that is that we have an amazing green space network. I think it's one of a kind in the world, and we have the oldest federally owned greenbelt in the world. So we have roughly about 560 or so square kilometers. Again, it's a different scale than what we heard from this morning, but again, very, very important. So we have the Greenbelt, we have Gatineau Park. So for all those locals, I'm sure you spent a lot of time in Gatineau Park. And I encourage you to spend some time in the Greenbelt because you'll find that there is a lot of biodiversity in the Greenbelt that I'll get to a little bit later. And we're doing a really great way to connect people into that Greenbelt. We also have a number of urban parks, and they sort of dovetail nicely with what Dave was saying there. And people are loving these parks. They want them bigger, they want more capacity, they want more events. They really want to spend time in nature. It makes them feel good. We know from E.O. Wilson's Biophilia document or his book that we need nature. We really, really need to be connected to that. We know it's important. The NCC commissioned a report in the last 18 months, and we studied why are these lands important from a natural capital perspective? Because everyone's saying, well, let's take a little bit from over here, take a little bit from over here, because we have a lot of pressure in our cities to accommodate for development. And often it's easy to go through and fragment some of our habitats. Say, well, we can compensate for the western chorus frog and create habitat over here, but it's never really the same. So the NCC studied the ecological services, and the numbers that came back here, as well as in Toronto and other areas, are staggering. $332 million annually for ecological services. That's pretty big. So if those natural lands were not there, that means that somehow we'd have to find that money for stormwater retention, for helping cool the cities. Very, very important. So here's the Greenbelt. It does a very, very good job at connecting the capital east to west. We did go through a biodiversity exercise, and we have dark shades of green, which is very important for biodiversity, and the lighter connections and linkages. It's larger than what most people think. The area that is darkest to the east side, that and the little area of the north is the size of Rouge National Park. So we have a very big surface area here, and one that is being well used by the community. So how are we making those connections? Well, geography is everything. It is in the heart of the capital. We have, in this case here, it's Stony Swamp Wetland, which is a provincially significant wetland, and you can see the community is immediately adjacent to this natural area. Those are some of our best stewards. They love the Greenbelt. They love having access to it. Many of them will advise us of what they see in there in terms of wildlife. And so the Greenbelt is a natural asset. We heard earlier that 80% of Canada's population, which is growing at 36 million, they're now living in these metropolitan areas. And Montreal, Vancouver, and Toronto, as well as Ottawa, we have a very important role to play to help connect people to nature, because that's where they live. So it's a real lovely treasure if you get to go out to a national park, and sometimes it's very expensive for some families to get out there. So we need to build that baseline here. We need to be able to inspire a love of nature, and that's what I feel my job is. And in working with Nick, we do our best to instill that. So how do we connect people to nature? access is so important. We have to make it easy for them to get into these natural areas. So we have over 750 kilometers of trails, links, pathways in all the capital region, which makes it much more accessible, much more easy to use. So what are people connecting to? There is an abundance of wetlands in the Greenbelt as well as in Gatineau Park. From our ecological services study, we know that the wetlands in the Greenbelt are where we get our ecosystem services. And that's also where people are spending their time. They're there to go skiing. This is the Mer Bleu Boardwalk. Mer Bleu, hope that some of you know that it is a internationally significant wetland under Ramsar, under the IUCN convention there. We only have 36 of these in Canada. How cool is it to have one in the capital city? It's pretty special. I think it's important for us to keep advocating for that. We connect people through our trail systems throughout all seasons. Kids love it. Photography, lots of activities happening here. So people are really coming into these areas to enjoy nature. We have several species at risk. We have 64 species at risk alone in the Greenbelt. And that really helps with the biodiversity. Then we have access, where this is where the blue and the green of the capital meet. So we have the Ottawa River, we have the Rideau River, and several creeks in there that also help people connect to nature. I like this picture because here you are in an urban area, and these two guys decided to bring their fishing gear in here, maybe just to hang out, have an area that's a little bit less noisy than where they are, and have a time to connect to nature. Something that's very good in the capital is that we can't make the connection alone. The NCC and the City of Ottawa and other agencies, and I heard this morning the 3 C's of connecting and conserving as well as collaborating, those are essential. So we have a number of groups in the capital that are helping us make that connection. This one here is a really great club, one of the oldest field naturalist clubs in Canada, McCown Club, and they've had what I call their nature lab in the Greenbelt for several years, and they've had students going through there. Some of them, I've hired them to be summer students now, and they have trees named after themselves. So they're really connected to nature. We have partners for aquatics and wetlands, invasive plants, and dune restoration. And what I've learned is that people want to do things in nature. They're okay to get dirty. And that's what we're doing a lot of in Greenbelt. We're getting people really dirty. So here, Stephen Cook, he got his students for 3 years to do a lot of work in our aquatic corridors. But they also brought in the public. So we had a lot of tree planting to do along a riparian corridor, because we were getting damaged from stormwater. So we took a very proactive approach. We studied it, we restored it. But in order to restore it, we really depended on the community, people, volunteers. And it was a very, very great success. Another way, we use academics to help us promote awareness of biodiversity and the importance of natural areas in Canada's capital. And this is the team of scientists that are doing great work at Mer Bleu. Mer Bleu is one of the It's one of the most studied bogs in the world, hundreds of publications. And this is the group that goes around and they advocate for protection of these wetlands. And we know that there are important wetlands in Canada that have not been designated under a Parks Act or something similar, and those require conservation as well. So by baby steps, by having people understand the importance of wetlands close to their home, hopefully it'll build some more energy and synergy. Invasive plants are a challenge, but they're also an opportunity. They're also an opportunity to have people come and help you and spend time in nature. We'll have communities and groups coming here and spend 4 hours, 6 hours pulling out buckthorn, pulling out dog strangling vine, and they're having a good time doing it, and they're looking for more places to do it. This is something that's really unique for us. Is a couple of years ago, I had someone give me a call, and they said, I like bugs. And they happen to be entomologists from Ag Canada, and I said, I like bugs too. So I met them into this little area called Piney Forest, and back in the 1960s, the provincial government thought it'd be great to plant some red pines on this habitat that they thought was rather desolate and not having a purpose. The pines grew up, they're quite sturdy, quite big, but these fellows told me how important the habitat underneath it is, and it's a 10,000-year-old sand dune. That was a deposition from the Champlain Sea. So I said, I like bugs too, let's do something about it. So 3 years later, we have this open sand dune complex. It required the cutting of about 1,000, 1,500 red pines, which is a pretty big deal in the city of Ottawa. Nick was great, and we had a lot of support from the city to do it. It was federal land, but the challenge is that people didn't understand what we were doing. They didn't understand that there's more to nature than just these standing pines that were planted by mistake in the wrong area. So what's great about here is that this is a restoration project. We have Sand Dune Sundays. This group called BCI, Biodiversity Conservancy International, they've taken on a really strong responsibility to showcase the sand dunes. There are people that are coming in here and taking a great interest in the unique insects that are being located here. The next sand dune of similar biodiversity is out in Manitoba. And just 4 years ago, you couldn't even see the sand. It was underneath all the duff layer of the pine. So there are over 1,000 students alone, elementary students, that come out here annually. And what's great about this is that in order for us to build that connection and that collaboration, we do need the help, but we also need money. So as a federal agency, there's not a lot of money to go around, but when you work with partners, and Dave mentioned this as well, there's an opportunity for them to find those dollars. And this group has found close to $500,000 to help us with this work, which is fantastic. Another way for us to engage people in nature is that we know there were areas in the Greenbelt that functioned differently. Some of them were wetlands. They didn't look anything like a wetland. So every opportunity we have at the NCC to bring back a functioning habitats or function into the Greenbelt, we do that. So here we partnered with Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. We've had a lot of issues, continued issues with stormwater management. Residents are living all around here. They're using the pathway. So here we constructed a wetland immediately adjacent to a pathway. And we're going to build a trail so people can go in there and actually enjoy it, look out for frogs, and have a bit more education outreach at these locations as well. Engaging youth and more collaboration in our stewardship is the way to do this. You know, I think across the country that there's not one agency that can do it alone. And we need to give these students hands-on exercise, or these children exercises that get them dirty. And the center picture here is one of my favorites, because the kids were out there, the school group came in, and this NGO is able to pay for the school buses to bring the schools to the site. They go into the classroom and they have biodiversity in the classroom conversations before they come out to the sand dune ecosystem. And when I was out here one day and I said, "Oh, you having fun?" And they're like, "This is way better than a zoo." And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. That's nice. So our job here is to continue to inspire. We will be launching off a number of pollinator projects as well with CPAWS as well as Canadian Wildlife Federation. We're building a wetland with Ducks Unlimited to help out with some more stormwater issues, and another way of getting people more engaged in that. We will be looking more on mental health and giving people a place or a sense of place to go to so they can just relax. Maybe we'll design some sort of meditation center or meditation boardwalk area so people can just go to a place and be quiet and not be so overwhelmed with the everyday and picking up your kids, dropping off your kids, getting to work on time. Nature is really important, and we really need to be connected to it. So often, you know, in our work, we have to measure how well we are doing. Is everything going well? We have biodiversity indicators that we do every year. We do social statistics to get us an idea of how many people are going into the Greenbelt, but this is my best measure of success. So when you get, you know, students to come back or email us to you and say, "I had a great time in the sand dune," or when you're out there and the parents will say to you, "My daughter was here on her school group and we had to come because she could not stop talking about the sand dunes or about, you know, pulling out invasive species in area," I think then we really have established a strong connection with people and nature. Thank you.
Is it the Well, while that loads up, I'll introduce myself. I'm Nick Stow. I'm an environmental planner and an ecologist with the City of Ottawa. I work in the Resiliency and Natural Systems Planning Unit at the city. So we are a multidisciplinary, small multidisciplinary group. We deal with the city's energy policies, its climate change policies, climate change adaptation, and natural areas protection and planning. We also take on a lot of other responsibilities at the city. We're involved in most of the big environmental assessments and most of the big development applications at some point or another. If it touches on the natural environment in some way, then we're usually involved in it. And I'm here very pleased to be representing that group today. I'll try and keep this pretty brief because I know there's going to be time for discussion following this. But I just want to say I'm really pleased to be presenting with Eva at the National Capital Commission. I won't lie to you, there's often a lot of friction between the National Capital Commission and the City of Ottawa on some things. But in terms of our natural areas and integrating our efforts in protecting natural areas and linking our natural areas network, we work very, very closely together. And I'm very pleased to be working with Eva for this presentation and on a continuing basis. I'll just briefly talk about what we do in terms of protecting Ottawa's natural landscape and its protected areas. Ottawa is almost 3,000 square kilometers in size. About 30% of that is in natural cover and about another 30% is in agricultural cover. We have some very important natural areas. I'm not going to talk too much about this. I'll just say that when we look at our rural area and our large rural natural areas, we do look in the greater context. So we do actually have a network vision, a conservation vision for our rural landscape that is set in the context of the Algonquin to Adirondack Conservation Initiative and also in the Ottawa Valley Conservation Plan by the Nature Conservancy. And that links, from that broad landscape context, we link down to the NCC's Greenbelt Master Plan and then into our own urban green space network. As we've talked about today, most Canadians now live in urban areas. 80% of Canadians are in urban areas. In Ottawa, that number is closer to 90%. And so the most people are going to have their contact with nature is in the urban context. And that's what we try to remember when we look at our urban natural areas. This is a photograph of a suburb in western Ottawa where the suburb has expanded right up to the edge of one of our most important natural areas called Trillium Woods. So we have a number of roles in protecting nature. I talked about that broad landscape context, the rural landscape context that we work in. We also have urban natural areas, and we have urban parks, parks being usually more programmed spaces. But we're good at identifying natural areas. We're pretty good at protecting them. But what we're not particularly good at is connecting people to those areas. That's not something that a municipality really does very well, is getting down onto the ground and working with people one-on-one. We just don't have the resources to do that we would like to have. And so what we do in Ottawa, what we've come to do is rely very much on working with partners and stakeholders in our local communities. Very much like Dan Harvey was talking about with Parks People. And so when I was asked to do this presentation, what I did was I went out to 4 of those groups and I said, I asked them to tell me what they would say if they were here, basically to give me a couple of slides from each group talking about how they use our urban public spaces to connect people to nature. So What I'm going to present now is not my presentation, it's their presentation. And so the first group I went and talked to was the Ottawa Stewardship Council. They have a very conservation stewardship mandate, and the first thing they wanted to highlight was their work with, just make sure. There we are, okay, the high schools. So they're very much involved in stewardship activities, and what they like to do is bring people in to do active hands-on stewardship in our natural areas. And so a lot of their work is with local high schools. They have half a dozen areas now in the city where they are bringing high school students in to do hands-on stewardship and education in natural areas. And we have formal agreements with them for some areas, but informal working arrangements with them in other areas. And so they do a lot of invasive species control, they do outreach and education, they do basic cleanups, and then a lot of curriculum related material. And they also work very much with the universities, in particular Carleton University. And so they've got projects that are ongoing with students from Carleton University in the Carp Hills, in the Carp River area, along the Ottawa River shoreline. And here they get students involved not just in doing research, but also in doing planning exercises, again, in outreach and education. It's tied into the coursework that the students are doing, and a lot of the work they're doing is of use to the city and to the National Capital Commission in making our own plans. One of my favorite groups is the Ottawa Children's Garden in Old Ottawa East, which is located in Robert Leggett Park. It's particularly close to me since my wife is actually the chair of the Children's Garden. And they have a very specific mandate. Robert Leggett Park is maybe 1,500 square meters in size. It's a little pocket park. But they have created what they call an urban farm. And their mandate is to bring children in and connect them with nature through the growing of their own food, but also education about seeds and plants and plant growth, talking to them about pollination and pollinators. They get the kids there, they get their hands dirty, they grow their own food. The Children's Garden is also open to local community groups. It's exceptionally well used. They have about 2,500 children from the surrounding area who make use of this park at one time or another. In Beechwood Cemetery, which is one of our national cemeteries, we have an area called McCowan Marsh. It's not very well known, which is surprising because it's one of the best examples of an outdoor classroom that you will find in Canada. It is not a City of Ottawa project. This project was actually initiated by two local schools, one of which is a private school. But basically at the edge of Beechwood Cemetery, there are some natural spring-fed ponds, and they have created this outdoor classroom there. And they bring their students in, first of all, from those two schools, but students also come in from schools all over Ottawa to work at McCowan Marsh. They have an ongoing biodiversity inventory program. They've identified more than 1,400 different species at this marsh from all different taxa, and they do incredible hands-on education with kids. The gentleman here is a biology teacher at the Saint Laurent Academy, Michael Levelet. This really was his brainchild. You can see him showing the kids there a salamander. And this is an award-winning outdoor classroom. And it's also become, more important, I think, from my point of view, it's become a model for other schools to follow in establishing outdoor classrooms. And We deal with the school boards in the planning on site plan control for new schools, and more we're seeing schools that are trying to retain wooded areas, natural areas on their school property so that they can connect their students to nature and do some outdoor education. One thing that's not very well understood is that it's very, very difficult for schools to do field trips these days. It's very difficult for them to get sufficient parent volunteers to accompany the children. It's very expensive to hire buses to take kids out on field trips, particularly if it's a school that's in a lower income neighborhood. And so having these opportunities close to the school is very important if they're going to do any hands-on type of outdoor education. When you're looking at that, strangely enough, I mean, we now, when we're working with developers on the layout of a community, we actually talk about things like how many major road crossings are there between the school and the nearest natural area? Is it something that's walking distance for the students at the school? Brewer Pond is a great example of a partnership between the City of Ottawa and the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. This was a rehabilitation of a pond that had been cut off from the Rideau River for many, many years, had stagnated, had basically become unusable by anyone. And using funds that they actually got, compensation money that they got from developers, as well as other funds, the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority put together a rehabilitation plan for Brewer Pond. They've reconnected it to the Ottawa River through a culvert. They've naturalized the pond. It's a terrific area. And it's also become, again, a community hub for involvement. So this is Tree Fest Ottawa, which uses the area quite extensively. They do tree walks. They have their annual festival. They've been holding it there. They also bring in people to help do invasive species control, education and outreach. It's a fantastic area, and Tree Fest Ottawa does a great job. And then a strange, maybe not quite such an obvious group that we work with is the Ottawa Mountain Bike Association. It's a peculiar relationship because sometimes we see mountain biking as being a threat to our natural areas. But what we have found is that it's really been uncontrolled mountain bike use that has been a threat to our natural areas, our urban natural areas. And we've had quite a successful working relationship with the Ottawa Mountain Bike Association in our South March Highlands Conservation Forest out in the west part of the city, where we actually have a written management agreement with them. They do all of the trail maintenance in that conservation forest. It's open to anyone, but they do all of the trail maintenance. And as part of that agreement, they closed off a lot of trails. They rehabilitated areas that have been negatively impacted. And what's fascinating to me about this is when they're doing their trail work and the trail restoration, it's the ecological, the biological knowledge that they bring to that. So when they're siting a trail, they're looking for the low impact areas. When they're closing a trail, it's to protect certain natural values. And so it's an education process for their own volunteers who are out there doing the trail maintenance. And they get a lot of people out there. The work they've done has not only opened it up to the Ottawa Mountain Bike Association, but to cross-country skiers, snowshoers, and hikers. So for us, connecting people with nature, we can provide the space in the urban area, but we really need these partnerships with these organizations to be successful at connecting people with nature. We do part of that through a regular wildlife speaker series, and we bring a lot of these groups in. We hold a little eco fair in conjunction with that. This has been ongoing now for 3 years, and we're planning to continue. Thank you very much. Yeah, if there are any questions, we're happy to take them. Okay, we got a few.
Hello, Mike Wong. I'm with the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas. Thank you very much for both presentations, Eva and Nick. I guess one of the advantages of being with the IUCN, the Canadian Committee of the IUCN, as an example, is the networking. You probably already made some of these connections. Sitting here in Ottawa, there are a lot of organizations such as Nature Canada, Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, and others that can probably provide a lot of expertise and support a lot of your programs. There are a lot of people in this room, retirees from Parks Canada, Environment Canada, who can also support. If that is an avenue that you're looking for, how can people get involved?
Sorry, I missed the last part of your question. How can...
if there are organizations in Ottawa or individuals in Ottawa who want to get involved in some of these projects or augment your programs, how can that happen?
Well, they can either they can contact the city directly. I mean, they contact me, and I can put people in touch with a lot of different organizations based on their interests. And they can contact the groups directly. The Ottawa Stewardship Council is extremely active. We have groups like Ecology Ottawa that are very, very active in the city. We actually, in Ottawa, we benefit greatly from the fact that we do have so many government organizations, so many non-government organizations that are housed here. So we have an enormous volunteer base and a very good volunteer base that we benefit from.
Good, thanks.
So just to add to that is there's always opportunity, and in fact I'm finding lately that it's more effective to work with organizations like CWF, CPAWS, Ducks Unlimited. Economically, it's less costly, and sometimes you get different styles of work, especially when it comes to designing restoration projects, and then also following up with the monitoring and the education. In terms of getting engaged in what we do at the NCC, there's a couple of options. I'm always looking for projects. So if you have ideas or if you have something that inspires you, the folks at Penny Sand Dunes, it is a retired group of entomologists. And they're out there all the time. They're traveling the world now presenting. They're having people calling them and saying, how'd you do that? And I'm essentially the canvas, and I make it happen, and I was happy to cut down 1,000 trees, and we paid for that, but all the science and all the engagement, majority of it is coming from them. The NCC does host a urban lab, and I think I was mentioning to Murray, I believe it was, that we can help you communicate this in Canada's capital, what you're trying to do here in IUCN, the Parks and People projects and other things that we heard. So we're always looking for people to add to the agenda item, and we'd like to sort of, because we are Canada's capital, it's okay to come to us and try to use us a little bit more as maybe an example of the good work everyone's doing.